look at the market for loanable funds, which puts the savers and the investors together in a market, and it's going to be used to determine the equilibrium interest rate. And then we're going to analyze the different things that will either shift the supply curve of funds, the savings curve, or shift the demand for investment funds, and how that equilibrium is going to change. So let's look through at some of this. Essentially, as is mentioned, everything is on this slide here, so let's go through an example. So we could think this supply curve, this is the supply by savers. The higher the interest rate, the greater amount they're willing to supply. The demand by investors is going to be greater when the interest rates are low. If they're high, there's very low demand. So let's try to see what can change the savings incentives. So anything that could make it more beneficial to save more, such as tax incentives on savings or higher consumption taxes, because essentially if you think of your after-tax income, some of it goes to consumption, some of it goes to savings. So if consumption is less appealing, savings will be more appealing. There's tax incentives. Or if there's a government budget surplus, so if they get a bigger surplus, there's going to be more public saving, which is going to lead to more national saving. So all of these can shift the supply curve. So let's say we have tax incentives that shift the supply curve. We'll have greater private saving, which will lead to a savings curve shifting right, which is going to lead to the interest rate to fall and to more savings happening. On the other hand, a higher investment rate can occur because of an investment tax credit. So tax advantage to a firm building a new factory or buying a new piece of equipment. So anything that encourages people to invest or subsidies attached to it or something else will shift the investment demand curve. So as the investment demand curve goes up, we expect interest rates to rise. But they're still higher. Like when you go through this analysis, all of these shiftings of curves analysis, you have to ask yourself the initial question here, which is the initial story. Does it shift supply or demand, supply of funds or demand for funds? And then whatever happens after you've analyzed this, the changes in interest rates, and the changes in loanable funds, well, then after that, you just take it as given. So in this case here, if I just look at this on its own, an investment tax credit will lead to the demand curve shifting right. It's not going to shift the supply curve because it's not related to the savers. But if you look at this and you say, oh, well, interest rates are going to go up. Because interest rates are going to go up, investors will demand less investment. No, that's not true. The whole curve has shifted. If interest rates would have stayed the same with this investment tax credit, we would have had this amount of investment. But because we're at this intersection, since interest rates go up, we're moving along this investment demand curve to this intersection. That's always the case. Okay. Also, if we think of government budget deficits and surpluses, well, government debt is the sum of past budget deficits and surpluses, and we say that there is crowding out when the government spends more and leads to a decrease in investments that results from more government borrowing. So let's see how that works. If the government borrows more, or essentially spends more, or taxes less, ends up having a bigger deficit, it's going to lead to smaller national saving, which is going to lead to a higher interest rate, and this higher interest rate is going to be faced by different people that want to have access to money, so investment's going to go down. That's why we say that government spending crowds out investment. So as is mentioned in the slide here, you just have to think about it as different things shift the supply curve, which is anything that changes public or private saving or national saving, and the only thing that shifts the investment demand curve are different things that influence investment by private investors. So that's it for this chapter on the financial system. We're going to move on to unemployment rates in chapter 9. And this whole discussion and the impact of government budget deficits and surpluses will come back when we get into an open economy. So make sure you have it clear. Right now we're in this simpler version with no trade and no flow of money going elsewhere. But this, the same discussion, you should ask yourself the same question in the future when we make things a little bit more complicated.